another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton, and today's guest is Jayne Freeman, otherwise known as Mamarama, speaking on childbirth education and birth trends. Jayne Freeman, also known locally as Mamarama, has been working with pregnant families for over 8 years in and around Jersey City, New Jersey, where she's lived for 15 years. She is a certified childbirth educator, breastfeeding counselor, and postpartum doula. Jayne has taught on MTV and for several pediatric practices and hospitals. She was a consultant for the Partnership for Maternal and Child Health, where she directed the Postpartum Mood Disorder Initiative. In 2014, she successfully petitioned the PATH train to create better awareness and seating signage for pregnant passengers. In addition to working with families, she writes regular blogs for various websites on the topics of pregnancy, birth, and new parenting. For more information, please visit her website at mamarama.tv. Welcome, Jayne, to the show. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Hi there. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about you sharing with our audience a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in childbirth education and breastfeeding counselor and postpartum doula, all the things that I mentioned in your bio, as well as starting Mamarama. So please share your who you are.
Well, it did all start with Mamarama, which began as a public access show. When I moved to Jersey City, it was kind of during a time when there was not a big parent community, and I had moved from New York where there were plenty of parents around me, and it felt like a whole new frontier. It also felt very different in terms of like the culture around me. I was a little bit like flying blindly. I couldn't find my footing as a new parent. And I also felt that, I happened upon the public access channel in Jersey City on Comcast Cable, which pretty much everybody had at that time. We're talking about 15 years ago. So I was watching a public access show that was really low budget. It was just a guy talking into the camera, and his lighting was 2 candles. That's how he presented himself. And I watched, and I was still interested in what he had to say, which was talking about the zodiac. It was he was reading like tarot cards for the entire astrology chart. So in a very generic way, and it was still really interesting. And that, believe it or not, that is exactly what spurred me to make my own public access show, because on one hand, I was struggling with being a new mom. I had 2 babies back to back. I needed a forum, an outlet to just share with other parents, but I couldn't find those parents. So I just decided to make it into a public access show and be able to share what was going on with me. So when I initially describe it, it sounds more like a blog or a vlog, but it actually evolved very organically into me becoming a teacher.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. Wow. So really the purpose was just to share your experience as a new mom, and it sounded like you were hoping to connect with other new moms in your community from the show. And then that's what evolved into you getting certified as a childbirth educator.
Right. It seems like a circuitous way to doing that, but these things, they have to evolve. It's not, like I always tell people, I'm like, nobody goes to college and says, "Oh, I want to be a childbirth educator." It just doesn't work that way. It comes from like a different place of experience and a desire. So a lot of people in the birth field, refer to that as a calling, and that's what they say about religious roles as well. You have a calling to be a priest. You don't just wake up one day and say, "Oh, this seems like a lucrative career." You know what I mean? So it's a similar thing. But starting as the public access show, it was really funny. Looking back at my old shows, which are still on YouTube if you dig deep enough. sometimes I just I looked like a mess. I would breastfeed in the middle of my why do I keep wanting to say my performance of my show? Like I would I would get the baby latched on, and I didn't even miss a beat. I was still talking. It was like blah 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 blah.
Wow.
And I would talk about everything. Like I remember turning the camera on one day and saying, I am so exhausted right now. I just feel like my entire body is going to melt. And like in the background, the kitchen is a mess, and there's like pots and pans everywhere, and the cabinet doors are all open. I just couldn't even. Was not concerned with pretense. I didn't care like what my setting looked like or how I looked. I just wanted to connect, and I wanted to share my experience. So as I prepared for each show, I just thought about like what are the things that I would want to know if I was a new parent, if I was just starting in this game, like what are the things I would like to know about? So I would just research things. I would be like, okay, so what are some of the side effects of epidural medication, or what are the things that you can do to better prepare yourself for an easier labor, or I would just look into these things. I would read about them, then I turn the camera on, and I would be like, I would just spout it back out, with using some of my own experience. So it was part subjective and part informational.
Mhm. Wow, and it sounds like it was part therapy for you as well. Like you just got to get it off your chest.
It was definitely therapy. I absolutely needed that outlet, and it worked. Little by little, I started to to meet more people and just kind of expand my horizons, and I finally recognized where my community was in Jersey City. But that was just part of the problem. The rest of it was just, how am I going to slog through this? I have a toddler and a newborn, and I'm sleep deprived, and I'm breastfeeding. I had been breastfeeding constantly. I was either pregnant or breastfeeding for like 3 years straight. So I just kept thinking, what would I have told myself if I had I had already had this prior experience? How can I make these things easier for other women? And that's what led me into going into an actual field. Instead of it being just sort of like this hobby, this side interest that I had that, just was sort of, I don't know, this thing that I did occasionally, it became something much, much more serious and more satisfying for me.
That is such a cool story. And so now it's been how many years that you've been teaching childbirth education classes?
I've been doing this for about 7 years, maybe a little bit longer. My segue into it was very slightly unorthodox. I had been sort of putting the word out that I was becoming a childbirth educator. I wasn't yet trained, and I certainly wasn't certified, but I got hired by this consortium, which no longer exists in Hudson County. They hired me to teach pregnant teenagers in the local high schools.
Oh.
So that was one of my first gigs, and it was absolutely perfect because these girls, they didn't know anything. They were blank slates, and I was just testing the waters. Like, okay, how do I discuss the stages of labor in a way that a 16-year-old can really grasp and not be afraid of? So it was an excellent way for me to just explore all of that and really work out the kinks and how do you explain the very basics of childbirth when you're dealing with a kid, basically. I had girls in my class as young as 13.
Wow.
I mean, I know it's horrifying to think of, but what wasn't horrifying?
Experience, though, for you, yeah.
Yeah, what was really satisfying and so rewarding about that was I didn't realize it at the time, but there weren't a lot of people in those girls' lives that spoke to them in a respectful and non-judgmental manner.
Right.
And that's what was happening in these little classes that we did during the lunchtime in the middle of their school day. You know, I came in with absolutely no, you know, of course I came in with no judgment. I'm a childbirth teacher. It's my mission to just help you understand what's ahead of you and make you feel less anxious about it. Mm-hmm. So you have a bunch of teenage girls in the room. They're definitely anxious, that's for sure.
Yeah, and they're not, and from what I'm hearing, too, they're not, like you said, being treated really very respectfully by, you know, the adults, so to speak, in their life. So that's so disempowering. That's a horrible place to be going into the birth process. So it sounds like you really were able to give them hope.
Yeah, that's exactly what it amounts to. If they're not going into the birth process with a sense of confidence and empowerment, then that can often set the tone for what happens forward. What kind of parent do they become? What kind of things do they think about in terms of the responsibility as a parent, and how can they make the best of the situation that they're in? That's all pretty heavy stuff. So it was a great program. I mean, I was one piece of it. I wasn't the entire program. They received a lot of different counseling and attention from other areas, but this was an important piece to it because a lot of them, they were completely clueless. They would say things like, "How does my baby eat inside of me when he doesn't have teeth?" Like I don't know what they were picturing. I have no idea. But their concept of pregnancy and labor was so limited that it was almost cartoonish. You know, it was just kind of like things that had been made up or stories that had been passed down from, equally uninformed sources. So.
Wow. So that was such a powerful process for these teenagers, but also for you as well. I could see how both of you were growing and learning through those 2 years of teaching. It's really cool.
Yeah, it was really good. And then I finally moved on to teaching, adults in a different setting, of course. People who...
Let's talk about that. Like, now you've been working with adults, couples that are preparing for childbirth and been teaching at pediatric offices and hospitals in the area. What are those classes, what does it look like over the past few years of you teaching? How has childbirth classes evolved?
Well, I do teach for a couple of different pediatric practices, or I have over the time that I've been teaching, and I have taught I've taught in a local hospital before, and I've taught privately. Obviously, privately is ideal for me personally because you can do whatever you want. Teaching in other circumstances is tricky because somebody else is sort of at the helm there, and it depends on the circumstances. But for the most part, childbirth classes have really changed over the past 10 years to become less and less informative, and that's what's that's a bit discouraging about it. And what I mean by that is they just keep shortening the time because we're in an age where people just do not have enough time to devote to certain things that, of course, you and I see as extremely important and valid and, just almost mandatory, for moving forward. But there are plenty of people who are just like, oh, childbirth class is just, part of the checklist of things I need to have done before this baby comes, like have the right stroller and whatever. So I don't feel like there's an enormous amount of time put into researching different childbirth classes. It's more like, okay, whatever's the most convenient or whatever's the cheapest and or whatever's the shortest. I don't want to spend 8 weeks taking a class. Here's a class that's only done in half a day, so let me take the half a day class.
Wow.
And, I've been teaching for long enough. Yeah, I know. It's like I've been teaching for long enough to realize that what happens when you teach a short class is that all of a sudden they're aware of all the things that they don't know, that they didn't know were going to be important, and they want to hear more about.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that just makes sense. If I'm assuming almost all of the couples that you're working with are probably first-time parents. I don't know how often people take it again if they've already had gone through birth. But
no, they almost never do.
Yeah.
The only times I teach a class to a second-time parent is if they had their first baby in another country, or if it's been like 5 to 10 years between babies, and they're just like, I don't even know what goes on in the hospitals anymore. I need a refresher, that kind of thing.
Right.
So,
okay.
Or sometimes I had somebody come to me once. Yeah, I had somebody come to me once who just said, you know what, I was not prepared at all when I had my daughter, 10 years ago, and now I really want to have a better sense of how I can advocate for my care. What are the differences that have occurred in the hospital setting? What are the are there more restrictions? Are there less restrictions? So, sometimes it's also like repairing things that had been neglected the first time around.
Sure. And I do see that a lot in my office where I'll have second-time moms come in for chiropractic care during their pregnancy, wishing they had known about the value, during their first pregnancy, but just having no awareness that this was important. And, sometimes it's, you have to have a life experience to realize, what you don't know, right? And then you can make different decisions for the upcoming second or third pregnancy. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know. And I don't feel that gets enough attention in classes. And that's part of, what's such a struggle about doing my class sometimes, especially when I'm in an abbreviated format, is that I think everything is important. You never know when you have that person who is going to have something that might be rare, but she heard in my class that there's a way to turn a baby who's in a breech position into a head-down position, for example. Or there's another thing that I mention a lot lately, which is you don't have to be uncomfortable in your pregnancy.
Yes.
This happens all the time, that women are like, oh, so much hurts. I have sciatica, and I have this, and I have that. And I always, this is my line. This is like my pat line. I'm like, right. And then you complain to your OB, and he or she says, well, you're pregnant. What do you expect? And everybody laughs, and they all have the exact same experience. And I like to tell people you don't have to live that way. You can go get chiropractic care, for example, to make that feeling go away. You don't have to live in discomfort like that. And sometimes, just having just little minor adjustments to your pelvis and to your, whatever, I'm not going to make up exactly what areas you touch upon, but sometimes minor adjustments are exactly what you need to have your baby in better position for an easier birth.
Definitely.
So that's something that people think is completely out of their control. It's like, I don't know, the baby is where the baby is.
Yeah, we're definitely culturally conditioned, especially in the United States. I can't speak so much for other places in the world, but Americans we're just taught, and I see it's really because most women in this country are under obstetric care, right, for their pregnancy and birth, and not working with a midwife, for example. So that type of care is not necessarily, medical care is not necessarily aware of these other holistic options that are safe during pregnancy to relieve common pregnancy symptoms like chiropractic or acupuncture or prenatal massage. And it's unfortunate because then these women are wanting that information from their OB, and if their OB is not necessarily educated on these options, then they're not going to make those recommendations. And so either they find out from their friends, ideally, that's what I see in my practice, is their girlfriends will say, oh, you really need to go see this chiropractor. She helped me during my pregnancy. But that's really from sharing, right, amongst the community of women who have gone through it, ahead of time. And so, or childbirth education classes is another option because, in other words, the OBs just don't have the time and the ability or whatever to make these types of referrals always. Unfortunately, it's just not kind of how the practice is set up, So
That's
I
right.
love that you mentioned that in your class. And, I think it's really valuable for women just to know that these are options, right? And it's whether you choose to use them or not is up to you. It's your body. But if you don't even know that you have this option and you think because you're pregnant you have to suffer, because you're pregnant, then that's what you'll continue to stay that way.
Yeah, that's exactly what I see happen over and over again. And it is a little bit discouraging. And so, like I said, I always try to work that in and give referrals, or always point people to my website so that they know that they have alternatives that they can look at. And I also reassure them that even though your OB didn't say directly to you, oh, sure, you can go to a chiropractor or see an acupuncturist, then maybe they didn't offer up that information, but if you mention it to them, they almost will never say, don't do that. They recognize that it's, that it's valid, and that in some ways, they're, I don't know. I just, especially with like trying to turn a breech baby, I think they often recognize that that you are better at doing that than they are.
Yes.
I mean,
correct.
I'll just tell you what I know, that from the medical way to turn a baby into a head down position, so an external version, has about a 50% success rate. That is much lower than chiropractic and acupuncture. And
That's
PT.
right. It's much more invasive, too. So, I mean, that's the other thing, is the efficacy is lower, but the invasiveness and the risk are much higher. So it's just like a no-brainer that you would want to start with the least invasive, safest route first. Right.
That's what I always tell people. I'm like, this is your first route to go by because it's the less invasive. And you can't just expect a miracle overnight. You have to do it a couple of times, and it can't be the day before your due date, clearly. But I think people get the message. And, I layer it into my class so often that I know it works, because I have people contact me afterwards via email, and they're like, wait, who can I go to again? My doctor's talking about doing an external version, and I'm scared. What are my alternatives? So they remember that I said something. I might not exactly remember what I said, but at least they know that there is an alternative to the more invasive and risky. I will say it's risky because, manually turning a baby, and this is why they do it in the hospital and why they do it with an epidural, is, can cause a baby to go into distress. And if that happens,
to be at least 37 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So if that happens, if the baby goes into distress, you're getting wheeled in right away for a C-section. It's happened to my students before.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's it. You're getting wheeled in, and and that can be discouraging and disheartening to people too. So, it's, I always try to point out the alternatives that may not have been put right in front of you, but they were all around you.
So with your current childbirth education classes, I know you've kind of mentioned, it sounds like over the years they've had to get shorter or, less. So what do they look like now? Give us an example of what a class would look like.
Well, I cover everything. I do the stages of labor so people understand what's happening in their body and what those things are called, so that they understand what their practitioner is talking about, what's first stage from second stage, what are the phases that go on, so they just have a better understanding of what I would refer to as the sort of landscape of labor. Help people understand how to cope with labor, both at home and then in the hospital setting, because those are two different environments in order for coping. I'll go back to that in a second. Then I go over what happens in the hospital setting, because everybody's birthing in a hospital. There's not a single person who comes to me in a class setting who's having a home birth.
Interesting. Well, not yet, at least.
Yeah.
Because there is almost 1% of women doing home birth now in the country. So
that's right. But they're not going to take a class that's like a 3-hour class that's designed to talk about the medical experience and the hospital the hospital experience. So
and
actually,
I have a question for you. If you're doing a private with a home birth couple, then you would modify your class for that home birth experience, correct?
Absolutely. You would have to. I did that. I've done that a couple of times, and it's interesting because it does change the entire way that I speak about things. Instead of like stay home longer, I'm like looking for ways that the couple can actually get out of the house and go for a walk and sort of distract themselves from, just feeling the walls closing in on themselves in a long labor, right?
Right.
Then I have to also talk about what happens if you have transfer to the hospital. So I do have to prep them for that possibility, but generally the focus is very different. And I will say that my mentor, my childbirth education mentor, Ellen Chuse, who's been teaching for over 30 years, I think, at this point, she's changed her whole go-to person in Park Slope. Everybody went to her classes. Expectant parents, and now she's changed to catering to the home birth only audience. So clearly there are enough people doing home births that, her classes get filled every couple of weeks, and those people want their own class where the content is really catered to their experience.
Wow, and that's so good that you just pointed that out for our listeners, that, there is such a difference between home birth and hospital birth, that the education has to be quite different as well, even though we're both talking about, they're both births, but they are such different experiences that they require a different type of education. It's really fascinating.
You're so right. I just don't even think about it that way, but that's absolutely true. And that brings me to just going back to your previous question about what do you teach in the class. The majority of what I spend on in the class is what happens to you in the hospital. Do you have to have IV fluids? Do you have to be connected to the monitor? Does your hospital have wireless monitoring? Are you going to be allowed to get into a shower or a bathtub for pain management? And that's a huge issue because a lot of the birthing films that people see, or sometimes just this kind of abstract expectation is, well, of course we can get into a bathtub. Doesn't every hospital have them? Or on the flip side, there are people who are like, why would I get into a bathtub? What is that supposed to do? Right. So in both cases, I have to help people understand that if you are having an unmedicated birth, one of your best options for comfort measure is the ability to get into water. And that is mainly because just the warmth and the relaxation of water around us reduces our perception of pain by up to 40%, which is about as much as you could expect from a shot of Demerol without the side effects.
Yeah, totally.
So people either think that's a non-issue, of course I'll be able to get into a bathtub, or they have no idea why getting into a bathtub or a shower might be helpful. But the problem is the hospitals in northern New Jersey and New York City were not built to equip the space and the need for bathtubs. Mm-hmm. They just weren't. You're not going to find those in the majority of hospitals. Mm-hmm. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did know that, because also for women wanting, let's say, a water birth in a hospital, it's very challenging to find a facility that would accommodate that.
I'm sorry, I'm having a coughing.
Oh, I mean, I know, for example, you're in Jersey City, I'm in Hoboken, and Jersey City Medical Center had, made a big deal when they brought on a midwife that they were putting a bathtub into one of their birthing rooms, and it was like you were mentioning, a big deal, because so many hospitals in this area, that's not even an option. Bathtubs, or especially a water birthing tub, is just not in existence. It's just not even an option if you're going to birth in that hospital. And New Jersey in particular has no birthing centers, so that's also limiting options for women that are wanting to birth that live in this area.
Oh, it's a pet peeve of mine. I mean, it's unforgivable that you don't give women that option.
Yeah.
Yes, and you're right. Jersey City Medical Center did put in, I think it's a couple of bathtubs in labor and delivery.
Is it two?
It's only one tub? No,
I thought it was
like
one because I did a tour. I think it was just one room that had the tub, and it was also supposed to only be during labor, that you could use it, like you were mentioning, for pain relief, but that you were supposed to get out when you were getting ready to birth.
Oh, well, that's everywhere, actually, in all the hospitals around here, even in a birthing center.
Right.
Unless you're at home, right. They won't let you push in a tub for liability reasons. And that's just, whatever. I mean, it's if you want the water birth experience, which it's funny because sometimes people will ask me about that, and I'm like, oh, okay, then you need to have a home birth because you're not going to get that around here.
Or you move to a different state.
Yeah, you're not going to get that around here. But I was going to say something else about the tub experience. And so then maybe a hospital has a bathtub, but then they have really strict restrictions. For example, if your water broke, if you're with midwives and you're in a birthing center and your water breaks, it's totally fine for you to get in the tub. They don't include that as sort of like a risk in any way. It's just not perceived like that. Right. Yet in a traditional hospital, that's, a no-no. Can't be in the water if your water has broken. So there are a lot of rules about things in terms of like what you can get for pain management. So back to what I teach in my classes, yes, I address that. I help people understand that they have that option. That option is available to them and that they should utilize it. But, for the most part, people want to hear, they really, really want to hear about epidurals. They have a lot of questions about epidural medication, and they have a lot of misunderstandings about epidural, primarily the side effects and I don't want to say proper usage, but let's say most judicious usage of the epidural. That's a more diplomatic way of putting it.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And that's something that you don't really learn until you're in a class. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, once again, I think that's a lot of what you're saying is really, people in your class are really, what they know about birth is all been like from pop culture, and there's a lot of misconceptions and misinformation that's out there. And, once again, during their prenatal visits to the OB, there's not time to cover these types of questions and topics, right? Like the doctor just doesn't have time allowed to do that. So that's the value of a childbirth education class, is things that they thought they know that they really don't know, or things that they didn't even realize they didn't know. You can cover those topics and answer questions, and there's time available so that ideally, when they finish the course, the woman or the couple are feeling empowered about what's ahead of them regarding the birth.
Oh, definitely. That's a very common theme, actually. This disillusionment with like how little time your OB is going to give you to answer questions, especially, again, around here. Most people go to very, very busy OB practices where you just have the most cursory of visits without a lot of time to ask the questions that may be going through your head. I think people are very frustrated by that, and it's great to have a childbirth educator to help you with that, but those people don't meet me until they're at the very end of their pregnancy. You don't take a childbirth class in the first trimester or the second trimester. So in essence, they've been kind of flying blind for a while. And I always tell people this, it's like by the time they meet me, they're so eager to have somebody who's just going to listen to them and give them ideas and alternatives. And, here's a really good one. Doctors quite often will prescribe iron supplements, right? Because pregnant women become anemic. That's very normal. And it's really important for them to keep their iron levels up. But nobody ever talks about the non-prescription version of iron, which could be delivered in a liquid form or in a much more readily absorbable form of
food.
of delivery. And if they ask their doctor, like, oh, is it okay if I take Floradix, for example? The doctor's like, yes, of course you can take that. But that's not what the doctor advised. So meanwhile, this woman's taking a very, very, very strong iron supplement that is making her constipated, and then she's like starting to become dependent on a stool softener, for example, or the prescription or the pharmaceutical company prescribing or developing the iron supplement has now, I don't know if you know this, but they've now included a stool softener in their iron supplement.
Oh my God,
and you may be taking that without even realizing that you are, and then that becomes a whole problem.
Right.
So, I mean, there's so many things where, like, just a little bit more knowledge on the topic, just talking to somebody who will listen to you or bring something up like, hey, by the way, if you're having really bad heartburn, you know, you shouldn't be popping Tums all day long because those Tums have calcium in them, and calcium inhibits your body's ability to absorb iron. So the doctor is not going to say that. Like, you'd have to be going to, I don't know, like a midwife or somebody who's, you know, got a different level of knowledge and a different approach, a much more holistic approach to this, to say, you know, try papaya enzymes. Those work just as well as Tums, and they're not full of chemicals and aluminum and calcium that you don't need.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. You know, I guess it's just recognizing that if you do choose to work with an OB as your birth provider, you know, having a birth team, which is something I very much advocate for, is just really crucial to support you during the pregnancy and not even waiting till third trimester. I wanted to mention something on your website, how you also offer service for newly pregnant couples to help them navigate, you know, birth provider and birth location, right? And because ideally that's not something that you are figuring out when you're in your third trimester. So can you speak a little bit to that? Because I think that's such a valuable service.
Oh, I really enjoy doing those sessions, and it's so meaningful to me when people contact me about that, because that shows they're really thinking and they're not just kind of like following, like, okay, well, this is the doctor my sister-in-law went to, so I'll just go to him too, you know?
Right.
They're really thinking about, like, okay, what are my expectations about birth? Like, what's the best hospital? What does that even mean, what's the best hospital? Right. If you ask 5 different people in different fields what the best hospital is, they're all going to have a different answer, or they're going to have a different answer depending on their perspective. So there's a very popular hospital in New Jersey. I won't call it by name, but that's a hospital that most people in the medical field would say is the best one. But why is it the best one? From my perspective, knowing what it's like for the woman going through the birth process at that hospital, I would not put that high on my list. They're very restrictive and interventive, and they don't want you to move around a lot in labor, and they don't even have bathtubs or showers available to you. Like, all of those things add up to me as what equals a better birth experience.
Right.
And what do they have, like the highest level NICU? Okay, well, that's one thing that could steer you into choosing a hospital, but it's very unlikely that your baby is going to need a high-level NICU, but it's very likely that you're going to experience your birth process in that hospital, no matter where it is, regardless of their NICU. So what's your priority? Worrying about the risk of something that may never happen, or knowing that you are going to be treated not like cattle when you're in the hospital setting? So when I do those consults, that's what we explore. We talk about all of that, you know, the birth experience, the expectations of a hospital, the expectations you might have of your practice. A lot of people don't know that their actual birth is managed by the hospital staff, and that the doctor only comes in during the pushing stage unless there's some complication, or unless the doctor happens to be in the hospital at that same time, you know, doing something else. So most of the time, you know, you may think that you have like a connection to your doctor and that he or she's going to hold your hand in labor. That is not the case. So it's so much better to have that understanding early on in your pregnancy, so then you can decide where to go from there.
Yeah, and possibly choose a midwife as a birth provider.
Right, exactly. That's right. To explain what is midwifery care, how is it different? Why does the whole rest of the world, everywhere from Europe to Scandinavia to New Zealand to Australia, Japan, I mean, people go to midwives. They only go to OBs when there's a complication. So why does why do we have this reverse standard where everything is a potential emergency? Right. And you mentioned midwife to the average person who's newly pregnant, and they're like, what is this, the Middle Ages? I mean, what does that mean? Well, I've actually had people say that to me.
Wow, I can't believe that blows my mind. Like, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Like, it's, 30, midwife use is 30, 40% or higher in well-developed, countries like Europe. We're not talking, third world countries. We're talking places that have the financial means, but just value for a low-risk pregnancy, value that midwifery care is ideal and optimal for births like that.
That's right.
And then referrals to high-risk pregnancies are made for the OBs only. And here in the U.S.,
as needed.
Right. Less than 10% of women are working with a midwife during pregnancy and birth. So it's quite strange how it is reversed here, but I think the more that we get out the word to women that these are their options, and it has to happen, earlier in the pregnancy, because switching providers at the end is usually not even really an option. So it's so great that you offer that service.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. Depending on the provider, many won't take a woman after a certain week of pregnancy, and certainly if she's there's even a little element of high risk, they're just, that's not going to happen either. So making these decisions early on in the pregnancy is the best thing you can do for yourself, just to think it through. Who knows, you may still end up with the OB that you already had in your mind, because that does suit your needs. I mean, I've had people say to me, like, I don't really love the idea of a midwife. I'm much more comfortable with a more medicalized approach, given my health history, for example, or whatever. So it's certainly not about steering people into a more holistic approach. It's really about finding what is the right fit for that person, knowing that they have other options. If you don't think you have an option, and that's what other people sometimes say to me, like, oh, I didn't know we had an option. I thought we had to have a doctor for birth. Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. It's really about presenting options and educating these women and families about what their options are, and then it's, knowing that they're going to make the best decision for them based on having that information. But we really, you can't make the right decisions for yourself if you don't know what your options are. So that's really what it boils down to. It's just an awareness of what's available and what's, out there.
Well, I think, because we're in a different age now, I mean, certainly when I started teaching, there was not the same level of information gathering as there is now. It's just taken it to a point where nothing is new or really unheard of by anybody who has even a mild curiosity in pregnancy and birth. I'm often, delighted by the sophistication level of my students in some of my classes that are like, asking me very in-depth questions about delayed cord clamping and about other things that they've heard and read about that might be beneficial to their baby's health or may impact their birth experience and so forth. So I think finally, I'm definitely having more people reach out to me asking about midwifery care and more holistic approaches and alternative everything, from the way you look at birth to the way you look at pregnancy to the way you deal with even a problem like a breech presentation, which I guess I'm assuming anyone listening knows that means an automatic C-section for 99% of OB practices. If the baby is not head down, you're not having a vaginal birth. That's just how it goes around here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so that's huge, and that's, that's the power of the internet, right? Like, people sharing this type of information that, was just not being readily shared as much, previously.
Well, there's always different trends in the way these things go. You think about like the 1970s was all about Lamaze, and it was about partner-supported birth, and we had Penny Simkin, and we had the birth partner, and we had a whole rise of a more holistic and almost like what people would say more of like a hippie approach to learning about birth and about the birth itself. And that gave way to something else in the 80s that became much more technologically driven. And so I feel like now, just at the stage that we're at now, everybody knows about, these things that would have been obscure 10 years ago are sort of common knowledge now. And the trend, I feel, is coming back a little bit more to
natural,
to a more natural approach, a less to understanding that a medicalized approach does have its place, but it also comes with some drawbacks and some serious risks. When we look at the C-section rate in this country, we know something is not right with the way pregnancy and birth are approached. That's the evidence right there, right in front of us, when we have such a high C-section rate. And then if you actually look at the hospitals in the New York area, they're so much higher than the national rate. We already think the national rate is high at 33-point-something%. But the individual rate at some of the hospitals around here tips out at 44-45% C-section rate.
In Hudson County, there's a hospital
of the women going in.
Yeah. So it's disturbing.
It should be disturbing. And one of the things I learned in my studies, and I go to workshops and symposiums and that sort of thing. And the interesting thing I learned about New Jersey was that one of the reasons we have one of the highest C-section rates in the entire country is because of induction. The blame comes from, everybody wanted to blame it on other things concerning the women and they're older and their bodies and this, that, and the other. No, it was because of doing early induction. And that's what the facts pointed to. That's what the evidence showed. That's what study after study revealed. And that is really sobering
all the time in my office. Yeah.
Yep.
It's like I need to give birth because, the doctor thinks I'm this many weeks and I'm overdue, so to speak, which drives me nuts. And so then they're given Pitocin, and we can see, the slippery slope that occurs from that.
Well, like I always say with induction, there is this sense that, okay, we can pump this woman full of chemicals and she'll have a baby. Like, let's just give her lots and lots of meds, and we'll force her uterus to do its thing, and she'll just have this baby.
Right.
But that's completely negating the naturalness of labor, and it's sort of like a symphony of occurrences hormonally, chemically, emotionally. There's so many things going on that the thought that you could just artificially make it happen is it's just completely nonsensical.
Yeah.
We can't make it happen. We can pump a woman full of Pitocin, but if her uterus is not ready to contract, it's not going to work. And if she was meant to go into labor at 41 plus weeks, or 41 weeks and a couple of days, who knows, but you pushed her into labor at 38 weeks, even though 38 weeks they're going to argue is full term, it doesn't mean it's going to end as a vaginal birth or the kind of birth experience that woman wanted. So, there's a whole other course of action, and that's being quite often just a little hyper-vigilant about risk assessment. What are the risks? What are the real risks? What are the true risks? What are the purported risks of every situation, whether it's big baby or the woman's age or, something else? I'm not talking about a legitimate medical indication, like where there's, I don't know, preeclampsia or something, and you have to deliver the baby or, we lose both mother and baby. That's kind of, that's not what we're talking about here, but we're talking about more of the gray area where a big baby is a classic example, women have these late-term sonograms that the technician or the doctor does a read on the baby's weight. And what the studies show us is that 85% of the time they're guessing too high, and that only 1 in 5 women who were told they were having a big baby, which is upwards of 4,000 grams or 8 pounds, 13 ounces, only 1 in 5 actually had a big baby, even though those 5 women were all told they were having a big baby. And that leads us into more inductions. Oh, we got to get that baby out before he gets so big he won't fit through your pelvis. Or it leads a woman straight into a C-section. Oh, look, he's measuring 11 pounds. You're never going to get that out. That's a danger to you and the baby. We better just section you.
Right. There's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of coercion through fear, right? And that's disturbing. When the facts are not presented, there's this misinformation being given, and then the decisions can't be really made based on what's factual and what's logical.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem with that sort of thing because it's presented as fact,
right?
And it's not. But at the same time, you can imagine a woman who's close to having her baby as being a little bit in a vulnerable spot there, and if her doctor's saying it's safer to do this, we can't blame her for just being like, okay, I guess I better do this. If you're really not armed with the information or you're not the type to just be like, let me see if I could, get around this somehow or, just second guess my doctor or negotiate this fact with my doctor. Not everybody has that temperament. And, that's...
Or confidence, really, because you're right.
The confidence to do that.
Very vulnerable place to be. So I know we're getting, to the top of the hour.
Okay.
So I'd love for you to just share with our audience. We talked about how you offer childbirth classes and you offer service to newly pregnant families about how to identify the birth provider that's the best fit for them. And you also offer postpartum doula services as well, which we didn't really talk so much about. How can our listeners that are living in the New York City, northern New Jersey area contact you and work with you?
You can go to Facebook and look up Mamarama of Jersey City. So there's my Facebook page. I post the classes that I'm teaching or different events or sometimes articles that pertain to things I think will be interesting to women before and after they've had babies. And, of course, my website, which is mamarama.tv. So it's Mamarama and .tv because I started out as a TV show. And because I couldn't get the .com, somebody's holding it. So that was the next best. But I'm perfectly comfortable with it. So my postpartum work is interestingly it's so much less clinical than everything that we've been discussing in this past hour. It's so much more emotional and hands-on and really, really has a very different feel than the stuff that comes before it, because now all these things that you prepped for, now you have this baby. You're going home from the hospital with this baby, and what do you do? Parents are quite often at a complete loss. They're just feeling overwhelmed, and all the things that they studied for are just now right in front of them, and a lot of times they just can't make sense of it or, work it out, particularly for breastfeeding. That's probably one of the biggest challenges. So I really try to help everybody with the breastfeeding component, the sleep and rest component, the taking care of yourself element to it, which gets lost on many, many people, particularly women who feel like they're doing it all and have to do it all. And helping partners become a part of it as well, so that they feel that they're an integral part of the early parenting experience, particularly if their partner is breastfeeding and they can't share in that exact feeding endeavor. Not yet, but, they'll get to that eventually. So yeah, that's been an incredible road for me and very, very rewarding. And I absolutely love working with new parents. Like I said, it's a very different climate, in terms of like what, how everybody's coping with new parenthood. And it's my job and my role to help them transition so that they don't need me anymore. That they're just like, bye, we've got this now. Thank you. And that's how it goes. That makes me feel the most satisfied.
Yeah, I love it. And how special and intimate to be able to go into a home, where there's a newborn and be part of that environment with that family. It's definitely, really special.
It really is. It's funny you say that because when I finish with a client, I often send them an email thanking them for that honor because it really is special and intimate. Yeah. At the time they're doing it, they're just like, help, but then when you sort of step outside of it, you're like, oh, this was, a very special transition that you helped ease us into. And that's a great feeling. And you want that to be a person who you can feel a connection to and, who you feel comfortable with in your home in a very intimate and vulnerable setting. It really, really is all of the above.
Yeah, I totally hear that. Well, Jayne, I just want to thank you so much for coming on Well-Adjusted Mama today and sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your passion regarding childbirth. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.